takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Joseph Lowe, and I am an executive member of Canadian Club Toronto and a partner at PwC. Today, we're honored to be joined by Sun Life CEO, Dean Connor, for his reflections on a decade at the helm of one of Canada's leading insurance companies, his thoughts on leading after the pandemic and the Canadian insurance industry on a global stage. Now, before we hear from our speakers, here's some information about how to participate. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The video quality may decrease, but the audio quality should remain strong. Once you click the questions tab, you can enter your questions in the window and they will be sent to the moderator. The request help button, located in the bottom right corner of the page, is there for technical support. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, LifeWorks, formerly Morneau Shepell, and Tories, today's conversation is free of charge. We are grateful for your support of today's discussion. The Canadian Club is a nonprofit, and we have been gathering people together for 124 years. It is because of our sponsors that we can continue to do that. Now, to introduce today's speaker, Dean Connor has been president and CEO of Sun Life since December 2011. Prior to CEO, Dean held the roles of head of Sun Life's Canadian operations and also that of chief operating officer. Dean has received countless accolades, including being named Canada's Outstanding CEO of the Year for 2017 and one of the top CEOs in the world in 2019 by Harvard Business Review. Today, Dean will be joined in conversation by Marcia Moffat, Managing Director and Canadian Country Head for BlackRock. Now, one of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is the toast we make to our country. So if you have a drink nearby, please join me in a toast to Canada. Marcia, it's my sincere pleasure to turn the Canadian Club podium over to you.
Thanks so much, Joe. And it's a real pleasure to be here and have an opportunity to interview Dean. And Dean, what I thought we would do to kick this off is get to know you a little bit better before we get into some of the more serious questions. So I'm going to ask a few rapid fire questions. You can answer in a word or two, no more than one sentence. So here we go. What are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading two books, actually. One on Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson, and I'm reading Bill Gates' book on how to avoid a climate disaster.
Okay, two very different reads. First thing you would like to do when life goes back to normal?
Hug our kids. And my wife and I just got our second jabs a few weeks ago, so we're now at that stage where we can do that.
Congratulations, that's fantastic to hear. So, during the pandemic, it's been hard on everyone. For you personally, what did you miss the most?
Oh, just being with people. I mean, it's we're tribal, right? As humans, and be able to get together, whether it's friends, family, but colleagues, and get on a plane and travel across Asia, or yeah, hey, we've done okay over Zoom, but I really miss the face-to-face interactions with clients, colleagues, partners, and so on.
Yeah, I understand that too. I'm looking forward to more of those in-person interactions. And with patios opening soon in Ontario and the situation looking better, hopefully we can safely do that. Morning or night person?
Morning.
Okay, what time?
Well, sometimes people get emails from me at 6:05 in the morning, but I'm usually up at 5:45, and usually kind of at my desk at 6:30 and reading, and so morning person.
Okay. Do you prefer to text or talk?
Talk. Yeah.
Coffee or tea?
Oh, coffee. Yeah, coffee times a lot.
Okay. How many per day?
3 or 4. Yeah.
Okay. Final question before we go into the more serious aspects. Sand or snow?
Oh, I think you know the answer to this one, Marcia.
Yeah,
we both ski at the same place. I'd say snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you there, and that's a good answer given that we live in a country such as Canada. So, all right. Well, listen. As mentioned in the introduction, you've had a tremendous career, and Sun Life is a tremendous company. The company began over 150 years ago. Is an industry leader globally. And so I think that people will be really interested to understand, as you look at the past decade that you've been at the helm, there's been a lot of challenges in the macro environment around us, and Sun Life has performed well and shown a lot of resilience, especially during the last year and a half. Can you talk a little bit about why that is? What do you think are the ingredients to your success? And, we'd also like to hear, frankly, where you stubbed toes along the way and how you dealt with that.
Well, I would start by saying that I when I stepped into the job in 2011, I inherited a very strong business, very strong balance sheet, a global footprint, and a kind of a storied history, and an amazing group of people. I think in terms of the last decade, it started with the 4-pillar strategy that we rolled out in the fall of 2011. And that it narrowed our focus. We got out of some businesses in the US, we sold some businesses, and we doubled down on others. We doubled down on Asia as one of the 4 pillars. We kind of committed again to Canada, which has been our biggest business forever. We focused and doubled down on group benefits in the United States. And then we focused on asset management as our 4th pillar. And just the clarity of the strategy helped create alignment around the company so that we could get 20,000 people lined up behind the same strategy and the same goals. So started with a great strategy, setting goals that were ambitious but achievable. So back in 2012, we were earning around $1.2 billion, and we said, hey, we think we could earn $1.85 billion by 2015. And just putting that goal out 3 years gave everybody, well, it created accountability, because then we had to run like heck and achieve it. But it created this alignment and this sort of sense of shared accountability. The third thing I would say is purpose. I mean, we have an amazing purpose as an industry and, as a company, helping our clients achieve lifetime financial security and live healthier lives. And, bringing the whole company back to the purpose and through stories, through client stories, how we're touching the lives of clients around the world, their personal stories, amplifying those stories, talking about them around the campfire. I think that was another important ingredient. Around 2005, we created a step change in our focus on clients. In fact, we changed the word from customer to client to denote a step change really towards obsession around clients. And we thought we were, client-centric, client-focused, but it really occurred to me we weren't as client-obsessed as we needed to be. And it meant changing not one thing or two things, but actually everything about how we run the company, how we compensate people. So today, 25% of the annual bonus pool depends on client scores, our language from customer to client, what we measure, what we talk about, everything. It changed everything. So that was another one. And then another element, Marcia, was focus on talent and high performance culture. And that was everything from the language of performance, which we in Sun Life, we say hits and misses, which I think, even the best batters in the major league only bat 350. So if you can talk about hits and misses, you can get to the conversations faster, goals that are ambitious but achievable, but a relentless focus on talent and people and helping people grow. And then in terms of misses along the way, stubbing the toe, there's lots. We don't have time to talk about them all today, but fortunately, touch wood, none of them were too large. So for example, we created a partnership in one of our countries in Asia with a state-owned enterprise. And, notwithstanding doing all the due diligence we could possibly do, it turned out to be the wrong fit for us. And we had to, after 24 months, we had to part ways. That was painful, but it was, I'd call it a flesh wound. And guess what? The thing has grown back way better, way bigger, way stronger. In the US group benefits market, around in the early 2010s, 11, 12, the pricing in the market got very competitive. And frankly, we kind of fell into that and we sharpened our pencils too much. And that created some real pricing gaps. And we took our lumps. We vowed it would never happen again. And we kind of fought back. And then the last thing I'd say, we've done around 40 M&A transactions, about $9 billion in total of buys, sells, and so on. And you know what? Not all have worked out as we'd hoped. You can't bat 1,000. But the good news is the bigger ones did. And the ones that didn't work out, we learned something from.
So I just want to dip into a couple of the statements that you made, Dean. So you said that in 2011, you doubled down in four areas: Asia, Canada, group benefits, and asset management. I think people would be interested to hear how you came to the conclusion that those were the areas to double down, and what actually did you deprioritize? Because it's always easy to add things. The really hard piece is, well, it's not easy, but it's easier than taking things away, because there's that fear of missing out and, did I make the wrong move? Taking things off the list and refocusing is a challenge for me.
Yeah, the biggest, that's really well said, Marcia. And the biggest changes we made in that regard were in the United States, where, we'd been selling life insurance in the United States since 1895. And yet, by 2011, we were only like number 25 in a market of over 100 competitors with no clear competitive advantages, no path to glory from the number 25 spot. And it was hard to do because it was a big part of our history, a big part of who we were. And so the decision to stop selling life insurance, and unfortunately, it affected many jobs. We had a big team business doing that. And then the second big change was the annuity business in the United States. So we were number 10 in that market. These are not just life annuities, but they're kind of investment products that have some guarantees underneath them, and very capital intensive, low margin, one of the most competitive markets in the world, lots of risk, interest rate risk and equity risk. And it was a tough decision in the sense that it was the main DNA of our US company. It's kind of who we were. It's where the conversation started. So the decision to stop that and then sell it, which we sold in 2013, really slimmed, like our US business really slimmed down in terms of size. But at the same time, we cut our equity risk exposure by a third, and we cut our interest rate exposure by 50% for the whole global company. And we reduced the amount of the capital we need to fund a year of growth by half. So we really changed the capital cash generation position of the company. So,
was a lot of that, was a lot of that due to, the macro environment? Clearly, you make these decisions in the context of what's happening in the world around you, and changes in the macro environment, because where a business may have made a lot of sense, in a certain environment, time passes, things change. And I just think, 2011, we're thinking it's on the heels of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. How much did your experience during that crisis influence your decisions and your strategy on the go forward?
Yeah, it did, because the global financial crisis was a great reminder that, nothing is linear. And when you have fat tail events, your models can be way off. And that's what happened in our case. It was big credit exposures that hurt and hurt many insurance companies at that time. When a Lehman Brothers falls as a single A credit, that's a pretty big surprise. So I think that was part of the impetus. It's interesting, an anecdote. I remember when we sold that annuity business in 2013, one of our large investors called me up and said, that's not a bad decision, but don't you think your timing's bad? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you sold it when interest rates were at like an all-time low. And if you waited till rates went back up, you'd get a lot more money for the business. That was 2013. And I said, well, you must have a better crystal ball on interest rates than I did. You can't time those things.
No, if strategically something makes sense, you've got to bite the bullet, because otherwise you can just end up waiting and kicking the can down the road. Okay, exactly. Well, very interesting. I delve into some of the misses more, but I want to keep going because there are other things that you've talked about, and I just wanted to pick up on your comments around the client and putting the client at the center. Maybe you can, we hear this from a lot of companies, and so it'd be good to really understand maybe a story or something like that to put a little meat on the bone as to what does this really mean to you and to Sun Life.
Yeah, a couple of stories. I like many leaders, I go to the call center every quarter, our call centers around the world, and shadow calls. And you learn a lot. You learn a lot about our people and our technology, but mostly you learn about clients. And I remember shadowing a call in Canada once, and a guy called in. He said, hey, I'd like to buy some more life insurance. And our call center operator said, I'm sorry, sir, this is a health and dental claims center. You have to go to your HR department to sign up for more life insurance. And the guy said, with all due respect, our HR department, they're not very well organized. And besides, like, our life insurance program is with Sun Life. Why can't I buy it from you? And I wanted to grab the microphone and say, yes, we can sell you some life insurance. But, it was an epiphany in the sense that the whole industry viewed plan members of group benefits plans, worksite plans, kind of not as the client. We viewed the employer as the client, sometimes the intermediary, the broker or consultant as a client, but not the end plan member. And it was an epiphany to me that we had in Canada 6 million Canadians, members of a Sun Life benefit or pension plan, that if we thought about them differently, were clients. And that launched a whole new business called Client Solutions, which would go direct to plan members and direct to clients. And that's been a great success. But I'll tell you, the thing that really kicked Client for Life into a new gear was maybe the second or third trip to Silicon Valley. And I remember distinctly, I was flying back, thinking about the last 3 days, thinking about met some really smart people, saw some amazing tech companies, great technology, but none of them were really I didn't think gonna disrupt or dislodge our business. But there was something really gnawing at me about something bugging me. And then I realized every single one of these companies was so client obsessed. And the joke was, if there were 5 people at a cocktail party in Silicon Valley and they were complaining about something, then boom, the next day there was an Uber or there was an Airbnb or something. And it just struck me that we we were not client obsessed as a company. And that actually required a whole new level of commitment and engagement, multi-year engagement, putting our money where our mouths were, including bonuses and everything else. It was a fundamental rewiring, and it's not done. You know, we've been at it for 6 years now. We've made great progress, but there's still a lot of wood to chop.
Yeah, well, and these things are never done because the world around continues to evolve. The client needs, client expectations, all of that continues to evolve based on our interactions with other, not insurance companies necessarily, but just in the world around us. And I find a lot of that has influenced our expectations. The online experience, for example, you know, if you think about what customers expect in terms of their online experiences, they expect that across all of the dimensions of their lives.
Yeah, that's really well said, Marcia. And I think the pandemic has even accelerated that use of technology, the online experiences. But the combination of you know, brilliant, amazing online experiences with amazing human experiences is really what we're aiming for. And you know, I think the insurance industry's come a long way, but we collectively we got a long way to go. It's still too hard to buy some of our products. You know, we in some cases we still draw blood for underwriting in life insurance. Now we've reduced that a lot. I think during the pandemic, 85% of our applications have gone through, like, you know, just using technology and artificial intelligence models and all that. But for the 15% where we send a nurse out to their home to collect blood, that's not a great process. So we've got more work to do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Sun Life as a Canadian company with a, you know, large global footprint as well. So, you know, here in Canada, you're an iconic brand. We've talked about the fact that you touch millions of people and thousands of companies across the country. How do you think about having Canada as your home base? And do you think there are advantages in that? What do you need to be mindful of? Because a large proportion of your business is outside Canada as well. And as a global company, you know, what do you need to be mindful of, and how do you play that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, 65% of our business is outside of Canada. And I'd say being headquartered in Canada, first of all, I think it's hard to be successful outside of your home country if you don't start from a really strong base in your country. So we're blessed with that. And frankly, this is something many Canadians don't know. Of the top, I'm going by memory here, of the top 13 publicly traded life insurance companies globally, guess how many are Canadian? Of the top 13 of the whole global life insurance industry publicly traded, 3 are Canadian. 3 out of 13.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say it was probably 3. Yeah.
So many Canadians don't. So why is that? How come Canadian and life companies are punching above their weight around the world? It starts by having a strong base in Canada. All of these companies started in the 1800s. And we're fortunate. We're in a country where people value protection. They value the value of advice, the value of protection from a trusted financial institution. We're a country of savers. We've got a very strong retirement income system, the 3 pillars of the retirement income system. And all of that has helped create, you know, domestic champions that can also have the kind of platform to become global champions. We also have a strong regulatory framework, and OSFI, you know, has done a good job, I think, threading the needle in terms of being a prudential regulator that's principles-based. We don't always see that in some other markets. We've got regulators who are very prescriptive, and there's a million rules, and OSFI has stayed above that for most parts and is a principles-based regulator. It's a very well-respected regulator around the world. And that takes me to another point. When we show up in different markets, having Canada on our calling card is a real advantage. In the eyes of local regulators, the fact that we're regulated by OSFI, that's kind of like the good housekeeping stamp of approval. It's not that they give us an easy pass, but it's a good starting point. when we show up to acquire a business in a country, the fact that we're from Canada is viewed as an attribute. And hiring talent, people like Canadian companies. Maybe I don't know, maybe because Canada's a little more multicultural. We come from a place of welcoming different types of people and finding ways to collaborate. So all of those, I think, have been strengths. I'll give you one on the. Go ahead.
I just some of the challenges of it, because I can see that in many countries we would be well received as Canadian, but look, I look at I look at our relationship as Canada with China right now, and you have operations in China, and has that been a challenge for you? How do you, and I understand this is a tough question to answer, but we're not always liked as a country. Oh. But then there's what you're doing corporately, and there's what's happening in other aspects of the relationship between countries. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and China is actually the best example of what you're talking about right now, Marcia. Mm-hmm. And the bad news is we're not very big in China. The good news is we're not very big in China, and therefore, at this red hot moment, we don't have many people coming to us and saying, why are you doing business in China? We don't have the Chinese government asking us to make statements that are supportive of their policies. For example, the national security law in Hong Kong, as other companies, other national global companies have found. So in some ways in mainland China, our business isn't big enough. It's a partnership, a joint venture with a state-owned enterprise. I think it is. In the end, what you do is you have to take a long-term view of these things. I think there are moments in time where your company can be in the penalty box because your country is in the penalty box, but that won't necessarily stay that way forever. And I think the thing about our business, we do take a very long-term view of things. You have to. I mean, we started this joint venture in China 20 years ago. Took, 10 years to break even. Same in India, started it 20 plus years ago. Took a long time to break. You have to take a very long-term view of these things, but you also have to be responsible. So I think, we have to make sure that our business is operating against a set of, kind of code of ethics that we think is right in those markets, that we think reflects who we are as a company. And, frankly, if we get to a place where we can't do that successfully, we'll have to ask some tough questions about whether it makes sense to do business there.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that more and more. We'll talk about environmental and social in a little bit, but, we're certainly seeing in our business too, that more companies are cognizant of who they're doing business with, and where they stand on, social issues. We're seeing quite a lot of that in the news. So, I would think that Sun Life as such a strong brand and such a well-run and well-governed company stands well. I had one more question about Asia, and then we've gotten a number of questions on the chat. I just wanted to pop into some of those for a moment. Because around Asia or your global operations is, one thing I've observed with Sun Life, and I think it's really good and important, is around how you deploy your talented people across different geographies, because this is a little bit of the danger, if you will, of being headquartered in one company, having operations around the world, and how do you make sure that you're connected enough, that your teams are connected enough. And I know you personally do a lot of traveling, but you've also, from what I've observed, you have your senior executives posted in different roles around the globe. And I'm just interested in whether that penetrates more deeply within the organization as well.
It does. I mean, if you looked at Asia, I don't know how many people we have there right now. It's probably 60, 70, 80 people from North America in different roles. Sometimes they move over and stay. Sometimes they move over for 5 years and come back. And sometimes it's just a temporary secondment. But I think it's incredibly valuable. It's part of the value. It's part of why do you come to work at Sun Life? It's an opportunity machine. The ability to, if you imagine this, if you're 26 years old and you could go, live in Singapore or Hong Kong or Malaysia or India. We've sent people to all these countries, Vietnam. It's an amazing experience. Heck, if you're 46, not 66, but so I think that's one. It's a part of the value prop. Second is, opportunity to pollinate the flower and take ideas and move them around and showcase, and when people come back, bringing ideas back. And then the third thing, and this actually addresses a challenge we have as Canada, which is, the pace and risk-taking in Canada is too slow as a country. And, the best thing I did in my career, in a way, is I moved to New York, and it was relatively short. I was only there 2 years, but I lived and worked in New York, and I ran Mercer's business in US and Latin America and Canada. The buzz, the hum, the click, the pace, the decision-making, the risk-taking is so different. And it just works at a different RPM. The same is true in Asia. The clock speed in Asia is incredibly fast. And I think one of the biggest advantages of sending people particularly from Canada to Asia and back, and Canada to the US and back, you come back with a different clock speed. You come back and your sense of urgency is higher. Doesn't mean you work harder, but your risk-taking, your sense of urgency is dialed up.
And you've been out of your comfort zone and you see things in different ways. I mean, I fully agree. I think that everybody should spend time. While I love Canada and I'm a very proud Canadian, we all should be spending time outside our borders and living and working. So I'm just going to dip into a couple of related questions here, Dean. The first one, a nice compliment from one of your advisors who's been with Sun Life for over 20 years and wants to thank you for your leadership and stewardship of Sun Life and your commitment. And it relates to, what we've just been talking about. This advisor is interested, he's seen, he or she actually, I don't know whether it's, has seen Sun Life continue to expand globally and is interested in how you see Canada and the Canadian business as it relates to the overall portfolio. And as you look down the road, and this person wishes you the best in your retirement.
Oh, that's nice.
So there you go.
By the way, our advisors, that's been one of the great joys of my job, is interacting with the Sun Life advisors around the world. Fond memories of, in the Philippines, at one of the sales conventions there, 4,000 advisors. This is on a Saturday. Kevin Strain, who was running Asia at the time, he's flown in he's Indiana Jones on a helicopter rope ladder, and I'm in a coal car strung up at the ceiling of this business, hoping the cables hold, kind of flying in on this coal car. The things we do for our jobs, but our advisors are just they're the heart and soul of our industry, and the sort of the jewel in the Sun Life crown. So Canada. Too many people look at Sun Life Canada and think, well, it's kind of a mature business. We've got leading market shares in group benefits and group pensions and life insurance and so on. But I'll tell you, I'm so excited about the growth opportunities. Jacques Goulet leads that business for us. He's doing an amazing job. There's so much runway to grow. As you know, Marcia, we started a mutual fund business 11 years ago, Sun Life Global Investments. It's now run by Arisha Smith, really, really talented leader, and she's grabbed a hold of it. This thing is going to grow like a rocket. Our business going direct to plan members, the thing I talked about earlier from the call center, that thing is growing. I think the advisors are being equipped. Back to your point around technology, we're rolling out new tools for our advisors. That in one of the things in the pandemic is if to connect with the client rather than drive an hour and go see a client, if you can have a half an hour Zoom call, boy, that's a big productivity jump. And our advisors grabbed hold of that during the pandemic. So anyway, I'm very bullish about the growth in Canada. It's, as I said, it's around 35% of the company today. I don't know what it'll be in 5 or 10 years, but I know Canada will have some really good growth ahead of it.
Right, and continue to grow. And on the economy, how are you thinking about the Canadian economy? Your perspectives there, I think, would be very interesting to this audience. And what do you hope for Canada?
Canada has so much potential, but I don't know how you view this, Marcia, but it feels like we just haven't quite tapped it yet. We're just not quite punching at our weight. So, for example, we're lagging in GDP per capita among G7 countries. And our GDP in total looks okay, but it's boosted by immigration. I think we need to talk more in Canada about GDP per capita, because if you're worried about, if you're worried about the middle class getting ahead, if you're worried about populism, it has to be about GDP per capita and how are individuals progressing in terms of, economic inclusion. And so I think we have a lot of work to do there. And I think it starts with setting a goal for the country that's ambitious but achievable. So imagine if we said, hey, Canada, we have so much going for we should aspire to be in the top quartile in GDP per capita growth among G7 or G20 countries. Why couldn't we do that? Instead of being dead last in 2019 in G7, why don't we aspire to be in the top quartile? And then you back up from that and say, well, okay, what would that take? Well, it would take a really breaking down interprovincial trade barriers. That's worth at least a point of GDP growth right there. Sort of self-imposed barriers to trade. It requires continued education of the workforce, knowledge workers. We should get more young people to work outside of Canada, to the point earlier, and then come back. Very few Canadian kids graduating from college go work abroad. Like, it's less than 3%, I think. And we should find ways to boost that. We have to figure out which sectors to really double down on and bet on. Technology, biotech, food security, finance, energy and energy transition. I think energy transition is a challenge for Canada, but it's a huge opportunity. So I think there's a lot of potential. I don't think we've really got our act together in terms of a really setting goals and creating an industrial policy that supports that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think, your points around being more forward looking, I think of it if you take the context of Sun Life and some of the things you talked about, not everything's going to work. And, but you need to be prepared to have a go at it. And then you need to be prepared to stop dedicating resources to something once it's clear that it's not working, as opposed to it being a drain. But you've got to be prepared to try and try new things. On the transition too, big opportunity there. And we are in a situation where the world is changing in terms of the view on energy and energy sources and transition. And we got to get our arms around that and look at what does this world look like 10, 20, 30 years from now. And
yeah,
for the future.
I agree. And I think, I think it feels to me like this is a sea change. And yeah, no pun intended but in terms of climate change, and it has accelerated during the pandemic, which is interesting. We now have $44 trillion of assets signed up around the world, committed to the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and the Net Zero Investment Managers Alliance. And I know you and BlackRock are really familiar with that. And Larry Fink has been very vocal, I think in a really helpful way, on the role of companies in climate change. You can't have $44 trillion of assets. And I know there's banking commitments too. You can't have $44 trillion of assets waking up saying, we are now committing to get to net zero by 2050 without some fundamental changes in the valuation of businesses. So this, I think this is first and foremost, it's kind of an existential thing for the planet, but it's also a big investment thing. Like the valuation of companies has to change. as capital gets reallocated. And
Yeah.
just selling businesses that are polluters or generate a lot of GHG emissions is not the solution, because somebody
that
else
just cuts the problem elsewhere. It doesn't help us.
Exactly.
with
So
the
how do you
actual
allocate
emissions.
capital, and how does Canada allocate capital resources as a country to be part of this solution? And I think there's a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, there was an estimate that I had read where it's something like $50 trillion of opportunity in the transition of investment opportunity. And, much of that's what it's going to take to meet the net zero targets by 2050. The vast majority of that is unspoken for right now. So, if we look at this from an opportunity perspective, leaning into these trends, I do believe there's a big thing around looking at what are the macro trends going on around the world and how do you lean into them. And moreover, this is the responsible thing to do as well as a company.
Yeah, that's right. But as you say, 50 trillion, I mean, it's not going to be easy at all, right? It's going to be really hard to hit net zero by 2050. But I think I've never seen so much energy behind it. Again, no pun intended, but and so much capital.
Yeah.
This huge mass of capital leaning against this problem. It's a bit like the massive science leaning against the vaccine problem. Man, what an impressive result. And
I think we will all be surprised, because human beings are innovative creatures, and when we get aligned and get behind something, great things can happen. I'd be curious, maybe we can dip into this a little bit further, and can you touch on what Sun Life is doing specifically? And I know that this will continue to evolve as you look forward, but where are you at on this journey thus far? Both yourselves and then how are you looking to be part of the solution with respect to climate change?
Yeah. So a couple of things to note. We are on track to being carbon neutral in our operations this year. Now, full disclosure, that includes buying some carbon offsets. So we're working on getting rid of those over time, but this year at least we'll be carbon neutral in our operations around the world. We have around $60 billion of sustainable investments today. I should back up and say that one of the things we've done in building Sun Life is within the asset management pillar, we've had MFS, Investment Management, which manages over $600 billion of client assets. They've been part of the company since 1982, amazing group of people. And then for the last 6 years, we've been building out Sun Life Capital Management, SLC Management, our alternatives manager. So think of real estate and private credit and alternative credit and infrastructure, including renewable energy. So SLC is part of the solution in putting together renewable energy. We're right in the process of raising $1 billion US renewable energy fund for the US. And of course, some of our general account investments are in there. So we've got $60 billion of investments today in what we call sustainable investments. That includes renewable energy efficiency projects, retrofitting buildings and so on, and social infrastructure as well. And we've committed that 60 billion will go to 80 billion in the next 5 years. So that's a big jump and a big commitment. We, of course, like everybody else, we're a UNPRI subscriber, and we did our first TCFD disclosures this year. Those will continue to grow and expand. We're one of the 5 or 6 financial institutions in Canada that's working with the Bank of Canada and OSFI to model out climate change risk sensitivity calibrations and metrics. So that's going to be really useful to help inform our TCFD disclosures, which will kind of show investors what happens to Sun Life if we have these extreme events. I mentioned MFS a second ago. Their investment decision-making process already integrates sustainability and climate change into the decision-making process. And they've taken a different approach. They have not created ESG funds per se. Instead, as they evaluate companies they want to invest in, and they tend to have a longer investment horizon than many managers, sustainability has been a huge part of the thought process behind that. And so their Morningstar ratings are kind of the tops in terms of the ESG factors, but it kind of comes from the bottom up. And then we're looking at this Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and Net Zero Investment Manager Alliance. We haven't made a call on that yet. We've been talking to other firms about how they're thinking about it. And then the last thing, and I kind of referenced this a second ago, we are rethinking how are we positioned in terms of investment know-how to be smart generators of alpha. What kind of alpha can you generate from transition? Because I do think I think there's a big movement of assets around that's going to change valuations. So we're thinking about do we have the right people? Do we have the right connections? Are we spending the right amount of time on energy transition? So we're making kind of investment of time and energy.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to that this isn't strictly about risk. There's the transition is about opportunity. You made a lot of really good points there, Dean. And I think that we're very much focused on management of the investment management, looking at our exposures, measurement and transparency, because if you can't measure it, then you can't evaluate. You can't evaluate properly. I think a lot of investors are focused there, and also interacting with companies through our investment stewardship team to ensure that that companies are thinking forward to the future and thinking about their business models in this future environment. And so, on the investor side, for you as Sun Life, what do you hear from your own shareholders and investors on, both climate, but also on the items like diversity and inclusion and so on, the social factors of ESG?
I think it's been an absolute sea change over my time as CEO. And I think today, the kind of conversations we're having with investors about our commitments on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We signed up with the Black North Initiative. We've committed to 50% or full gender parity around executive roles by 2025, and 25% of our vice presidents and above coming from Black, Indigenous, people of color populations. So we've made commitments. We're holding ourselves accountable. I think those conversations with investors, they're very interested in hearing about that and how we're going to get there and how we're reporting on that. And same on climate change. So, I think it's still early days in terms of setting goals and particularly goals for 2025 and 2030 in terms of GHG emissions reduction in our portfolios. But I know that our investors want to talk about that. One reflection of that, one way you see that is the analyst community, the sell side, are organizing more and more conferences for clients of theirs, investors, to hear from companies on energy transition, to hear from companies on climate change. And I think that's just going to grow. And you're going to see more, and you've seen it with Shell and ExxonMobil and other shareholder interventions. I think shareholder capitalism is alive and well, and I think you're going to see a lot of votes withheld and a lot of votes to support and nudge companies in these directions. So, I think it's I think Kevin Strain, who's taking over from me in August, he's going to have a very different, and other CEOs, you are all, and you too, Marcia, as a CEO, you're going to have a very different path than the one that I've had in the last 10 years. And I think that's a great thing. I think the dialogue is just going to get better.
I'm going to dip back to a couple of questions from the audience. And I'm going to first of all say we've gotten a number of questions in, so I apologize I can't get to them all, but I'm going to touch on a few of them. And then I want to make sure, because we're at 10 minutes to the hour, that we have a few minutes forward-looking to talk about you as a leader and advice that you have for others. So one of these is around COVID. And if you could have told yourself one thing about the year ahead on the day the world shut down, March 2020. This is with the benefit of hindsight. Dean, what would that have been?
One thing, benefit of hindsight, go buy a bike sooner.
I found one, by the way. I found a bike, but it was not easy. It was not easy.
It felt like you were in the black market in Russia or something in the 1970s. So, I think there were so many surprises around COVID. I think this doesn't exactly answer the question, but one of the things that surprised me the most is how incredibly resilient our people were and how resilient the business was. We went to work from home on the Monday when everything shut down, and we had all our call centers up and running, and our trading desks were running, and everything worked. And it was a great credit to our technology people. I know that's not unique to Sun Life, but I think that that is quite remarkable when you think about how we
maybe some of it would be not to worry so much that you've got smart, talented people, and they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, that's right. And the people were motivated.
It was a very anxiety-ridden time.
Yeah, very, very anxious times.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that is a surprise in the end, we model out pandemic risk. Won't surprise you to know, as a life insurance company, that's one of the severe stresses we've modeled for a long time. And we've tended to use the 1919 Spanish flu as kind of one way to do that. But I'll tell you, and normally when we model that out, we have all kinds of horrific economic outcomes, including tremendous credit losses as companies go bankrupt and so on. And the huge surprise for the world here was that governments would actually intervene and shut down whole economies and would use massive fiscal monetary stimulus or support to prop up economies. And I don't think many people had modeled that. And that was a pleasant surprise in one sense for financial institutions, because the credit losses have been way less than they otherwise would have been. And I give our governments tremendous credit, learned a lot from the global financial crisis. Nobody dithered. They did a great job jumping on that.
Yeah. And another question, and I'm going to turn to leadership, which is, as we've lived most of this last 18 months online, everyone is thinking about protection and cybersecurity. Are we paying enough attention?
Oh, cybersecurity. This is boy, we could spend a whole hour on this. This is maybe
just 30 seconds, because I really want to get back to you.
Yeah. So look, we have today. It used to be that criminals would go rob banks, and turns out that's just too hard. It's way easier to sit in your office somewhere in other parts of the world and hack in and demand some ransom as you encrypt files and wait for the ransom to flow in through Bitcoin. So this is a huge problem. If these bank robberies were happening in person, governments would be all over them. And the digital equivalent is, we have to, I think, and I was happy to see with the energy transmission business in the US, they actually recovered Bitcoins. These exchanges have to get regulated somehow, so that they're not all the AML and ATF rules that financial institutions have to do in the real world. We have to have that in the virtual world. Otherwise, there's a whole black market of transactions that are going to be aided and abetted and drive this cyber thing.
Yeah.
So
couldn't agree more. Okay, well, we're going to look ahead, and a number of the questions did relate to you as a leader, and I know that's an uncomfortable question for a person as modest as you are, Dean, but we're going to go there. And just, thinking about, looking ahead, some of questions around what do you think is next for you, but also, and you touched on this a little bit, is to be successful as a CEO, how is that skill set changing? What are the most important attributes of a senior leader or a CEO of an organization? And if you can relate this back to yourself a little bit too, that'd be great.
Well, I think it's interesting. We're just in the middle of we're doing a P&L leader training session, and Kevin and I and Jacques and I have been leading these around the world, and we have the sort of 10 lessons on leadership that I've learned. one of them is around, and I think Satya Nadella at Microsoft coined this, or at least said it, it's better to be a learn-it-all than a know-it-all. And I love that expression, because you have to be a learn-it-all as a CEO. And when you're looking at CEO candidates, the question the board asks is not where is this person today, but what trajectory are they on? What will they look like in 3, 4, 5 years? Will they still be learning new things in the second half of their tenure as a CEO? So being a learn-it-all is hugely important. And you can see that in people. You can see that as you look at people and you look at how they've grown and developed, what they've learned. The second one is being absolutely purpose-driven and anchored around the purpose of the business. There's a lot of things that, and you know this, Marcia, as a CEO, a lot of things that come along and knock you off your stride in your business. And so always being anchored around the purpose, this laser-like focus on purpose. Why are we in business? What are we trying to do for our clients and for our communities and so on? That is crystal clear important. I think it's important to have a worldview on things. Even if your business is just in Canada, there's so much connectivity around the world. You have to be curious about, what is the G7 working on this weekend? And how's that going to affect me and us and Canada?
Yeah, keep your eyes up and look around at what's going on in the world. Mm-hmm.
But I think the things that I would say new CEOs have to double down on going forward. One is technology. So understanding the tech stack, understanding the cloud, understanding digital data and analytics, the power of data, but the responsibility of data, governance of data, finding the line between creepy and cool in treating client data properly. That's a whole set of skills that I didn't have, frankly, 10 years ago, that I've been working on and learning and investing in. But going forward, technology, understanding platforms and digital ecosystems, that's one. The second we talked about is climate change and sustainability, and really understanding. I can't think of a single business that won't be touched in some cases profoundly by climate change. And so really investing.
So I'm feeling like we're coming at the hour, and I feel terrible because we could keep going, Dean. But I'm going to take that as the words of advice. So I was going to go to aspiring future business leaders, but I think that if you wanted to, spend 10 seconds on that, and then I'm going to pass the baton or the mic back to Joe to close. This has been a real pleasure.
Well,
final parting words of advice.
Parting words. Okay, for future business leaders, at some point, try hard to get some work outside of Canada, US, Asia, places where the clock speeds faster, and just be a lifelong learner. Marcia, I got to say thank you to you for doing this today. You've asked great questions. We had a great dialogue. Our partnership with BlackRock has been fantastic. You've been a great partner, and you've been a great contributor to the Business Council of Canada, where we sit together, and you've been a great partner on local and economic inclusion and the work we've done there. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks so much, Dean. It's been a real honor and pleasure. Joe, over to you.
Thanks so much, Marcia. Guests, thank you for spending your lunch hour with us today. Dean, thank you for joining us and sharing your insights from over a decade of experience in the C-suite. Personally, I was particularly struck by your comments on purpose at Sun Life and how important stories are, not only to inspire the organization, but also how you speak to your clients. Obviously, it made your top 10, and it's clear that this approach has really underpinned the company's strategy and success. We wish you all the best in your retirement and the next chapter. Marcia, thank you for your very thoughtful guidance of today's conversation. I really enjoyed the quick-fire questions, really kind of at the front end, which really allowed us to know not just what Dean has done, but really who he is. Guests, we hope you'll join us again for some of our upcoming events. On June 15th, in partnership with the YMCA of Greater Toronto, we will host a panel on childcare in Canada. Our expert panelists will discuss the benefits, challenges, and opportunities of Canada-wide childcare. And on June 16th, in partnership with Casey House, we'll host a conversation on how the HIV/AIDS pandemic can help inform and shape a recovery response to COVID-19. Thank you again to the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, LifeWorks, and Tories for sponsoring today's events. Our events would not be possible without sponsors like yourselves, so thank you for your continued generosity. Thank you as well to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications, and livemeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together today virtually. Guests, thank you again for joining us. Stay healthy and safe.